and this is research and innovation. Not every project is going to deliver the results precisely as intended when you start. But what you do know is if you do not start, you will not get any results.
Ron van Manen, thank you so much for finding some time for us today. We met recently at the Paris Air Show. I've already spoken to your colleague Marijn, who was kind enough to do a podcast with us, and I think we'll probably marry both of these podcasts together. I'm really excited to hear more about yourself, more about your organisation. It's something that's very close to my heart. But before I talk the whole time, I think it'd be great. Maybe you can just introduce yourself, say who you are and how you ended up doing what you're doing today.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Nick. So my name's Ron van Manen. I am the managing director of a foundation in the Netherlands called Luchtvaart in Transitie. And that was set up specifically to join forces with the Dutch government in the program management of a large aviation research and innovation program. In fact, the largest we've had in the Netherlands since the mid-90s, when Fokker was still one of the 3 or 4 world-leading regional aircraft producers. Since the demise of Fokker in that time, the industry has survived. In fact, it has survived and thrived, but let's say more at a tier 1 supply chain level. Next to that, of course, aviation is a very important sector for the Netherlands and for the Dutch economy. My own background is aeronautical engineering, so I'm a bit of a lifer in this sector. Did aerodynamical research. I wanted to get the hell out of the research when I had finished my degree and joined KLM. I spent about 15 years in the airline industry. KLM, British Airways, then Air France KLM. And after that, it revolved into working on engineering projects, working in research. Among that, in total, actually about 11 years in the UK, British Airways, later for a company called Kinetic that was doing a lot of contract research for the MOD at the time, but increasingly also for the civil aviation sector. That was my role, to kind of take all of that intellectual property and to make that useful in a civil aviation environment. And then until I joined Luchtvaart in Transitie, I spent almost 12 years working in Brussels in one of the so-called joint undertakings, the joint undertaking now called Clean Aviation. And that was a very big program office running EU research with the aeronautical sector as its partner in crime in Europe. So kind of from the operational side back into engineering, back into research, which isn't what normally people I think would do. What struck me was, I think around 20 years ago when I joined that effort in Connecticut, it was already evident that about 3/4 of the research was linked to fuel efficiency, to environmental impact, and increasingly, of course, also into climate impact. And that's one of the 2 major objectives we have in Luchtvaart in Transitie.
And that's absolutely great. And just for the listeners at home, by the way, Luchtvaart in Transitie, I will probably be referring to it as Aviation in Transition. That's the same organisation, before we confuse anyone who's listening to this whilst they're driving or watching this podcast on YouTube. What I love about your organisation, the LIT, Luchtvaart in Transitie, Aviation in Transition, what I love about the organisation is it's all about collaboration. And that's such a great thing. We always say at Progress Factors that everything we need to save the planet has already been invented. We just need to work together. And that seems to be, a core focus. And obviously, I've done my due diligence before our conversation today. And I went through the list of people that are on your board and your advisory board and working on your team as well. Happy to see Sébastien Dubois there, who we've also recorded a podcast with. He's from the European Union's Clean Aviation Fund. And it's wonderful to see how we can connect these dots between each other, that we see that all these, investment funds and sponsoring from governments and from the EU, that it's not just a political statement. I sometimes have the feeling if you want to get into government, you have to say, we're going to spend 10 billion on sustainable aviation, and then nothing kind of happens because it's hard to get to the money. It seems like you guys are making it easier to get to the money. And we're going to talk about the 12 projects you're supporting later on. But maybe you can just talk about the whole ethos of this collaboration between different organizations.
Absolutely. So the origin of LIT was an initiative that the Dutch government took more or less at exactly the same time as the German government, which was to set something up which they call the Growth Fund. It's a very interesting animal because it's basically going to the capital markets for money to then use the government, kind of in the Mariana Mazzucato style of making markets, to use the government together with industry to set out programs that had a transformational nature. And the two transformational ideas were digitalization and climate neutrality. But to approach them as a business opportunity. So not as a threat, but how can we pivot in our minds towards a business opportunity? And that's key because I think we have a pedigree in the Netherlands from many, many decades of aviation. KLM is a very large airline. Schiphol is a main port in Europe. The supply chain is still there. But in the global perspective, we're a small player. So we think we can co-lead that transformation. But we need to reach out to other European nations, and probably even broader than that. Frans Timmermans once said, Europe consists of two kinds of countries: small countries and countries that haven't yet realized that they're small. So I think in the EU, and we're finding this in defense, but it goes for the climate challenge as well. So we want to use the knowledge, the talent pool, the ingenuity in the Netherlands, not only to invent smart stuff, but to, at a very early stage, make those connections that are necessary to build a supply chain that ultimately will not only lead to new engines, new energy sources on board, new systems, new aircraft, but it doesn't stop there as well, because if you have a hydrogen aircraft but you don't have hydrogen, we're not going to get very far either. And I think the industry is starting to really wise up to that system of systems nature.
Especially because hydrogen's so difficult to transport. And actually I was going to talk about the projects later on, but I saw there was a really interesting one that's talking about how to actually capture hydrogen and keep it in a tank. And I even downloaded one of your papers. Really, guys, you've got to go along. I'm just going to check. It's the lit.aero is your website, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So lit.aero, I went there, and you can download papers where you can actually see what people are researching into. And one of those was about the micro cracks in tanks, which is where the hydrogen leaks out of. And I don't know, maybe you'll correct me when I say this, but I've been told in other podcasts, if you leave an aeroplane full of hydrogen, if you fill it up at 5 o'clock in the evening and come back at 8 o'clock the next morning, the chances are that the hydrogen isn't in the aeroplane anymore. So sealing those tanks is a real big challenge for the aviation industry, right?
And I hope we can do better than that, than the comment you received. But hydrogen is a sneaky little molecule, and the Netherlands as a country has some experience because we have a hydrogen valley in the north. We have one around Rotterdam, and some of the depleted gas fields in the North Sea may be very suited to storing hydrogen if hydrogen is produced from renewable energy. And of course, if you have large wind farms and solar on land, the challenge we have is you produce energy when you don't need it, and sometimes you need energy when you can't produce it.
Yeah.
The Dunkelflaute is what they call it in Germany, right? When it's both dark and there's no wind.
Yeah.
And you can pump, what the Swiss do, you can pump water up to up the Alps and then let it run down for hydro. But hydrogen is actually a pretty cool, no pun intended, way of storing energy and then using it. Of course, you don't want to store it for long periods in a liquid form. Yeah. But you have to get it from, if you're electrolyzing it, you have to get it on land, you have to store it. And even those, that transport through pipelines, etc., is still a challenge. On board, we're not going to store hydrogen for weeks or months. I think what we've learned from our projects in terms of the materials that you would use, practically speaking, for an aircraft running on hydrogen, is that both the cooling in terms of insulation and leakage is that it's much lower than that. Even the boil off is only single-digit percentages if you leave an aircraft for a day or two. Which is encouraging, but that doesn't mean there are no challenges. Yeah.
Okay then. So I mean, I think like the whole thing which makes it exciting for me, the time that we're living in, is there's so many technologies that need to come together. There's no silver bullet for sustainability and climate change. We need to really have, like local for local, or let's say a use case for use case solutions. So again, I'm not here to just do, pitches for our other podcast, but we recently also released one with a guy called Tom Forner. So Thomas Forner, he's one of the founders of Focused Energy, and they're working to actually take hydrogen and nuclear fuse it. So it's the opposite to atomic power stations in the sense of taking a heavy element and splitting the atom. They're actually taking two of the lightest, so the very lightest elements, hydrogen, and taking two of those particles and pushing them together. And it's absolutely amazing. It's basically like nuclear energy without, more or less without all the downsides of nuclear energy. So if we can create lots of electricity with hydrogen, if we can also power airplanes with hydrogen. Just this morning I was reading an article about a startup in the UK, and what they're doing is they're putting lime inside ship containers, and then basically those containers go onto container ships and they use it as a carbon recapture technology. They're getting 83% of the carbon that comes out of the exhaust tube of a boat and actually putting it through these containers. And of course it's easy to retrofit if it's built in a container, and then you can just swap those at the next port. It turns into limestone, and then they put the next fresh lime in there. The reason I'm saying all of this is there's only so much hydrogen around, and there's only so much sustainable aviation fuel around. And, let's not get into the whole debate about eSAF or biological SAF, but basically we need to make sure that the right technologies are going in the right use cases. And personally, I believe sustainable aviation fuel should be, prioritized in aviation, because it's very hard to put a container with limestone on an aeroplane and still get it off the ground with some passengers, right? Efficiently. Whereas in a boat, extra weight isn't quite such a big issue, yeah?
Yeah. Well, I think what that proves, a brilliant example, by the way, is that we are going to be tested in terms of our creativity and ingenuity in tackling this issue, which is 1.5 degrees, or if you, like I personally believe that the horse is already bolted from the gate in terms of 1.5, and we'll end up having to return to 1.5 C. Even then, every single decimal point of climate warming that we avoid is going to prove very useful. So we shouldn't obsess over what the exact point in time and the exact period. Back to aviation. I very strongly believe that, because I get people telling me that all the time, the infrastructure is built around kerosene. The aviation system can only use one fuel. And then I go and I gas up my car, and I can choose between 4 or 5 very different fuels: electricity, liquid natural gas, liquid petroleum gas, diesel, 2 versions of gasoline. I simply don't buy it anymore. The infrastructure in the U.S. in terms of petrol stations is I think, more than 100 times more complex with nodes in the system than all commercial airports in the world. So if you can do that at a gas station, you can do it at an airport. What that means, I think, is that we're going to see a blossoming of different energy sources, different types of aircraft using different fuels and energy sources, depending on whether you're 10 passengers, a couple of 100 miles, or say 100 passengers, 1,000 miles, all the way up to, and there's a little bit of an asterisk there, all the way up to 300 passengers, let's say 8, 9, 10,000 miles. And that asterisk is, do we really need aircraft to be designed for such a long range when actually there's no 2 city pairs that you cannot connect without 2 4,000 mile sectors. When you start burning fuel to carry the fuel for very, very long distance, the passenger likes nonstop. The planet doesn't, right? And it kind of boils down to, this is maybe a little bit provocative, but it kind of boils down to, if you look at the old energy mix, and I call that the sun ray to the runway. If you look at the whole energy mix in that sense, where we can use battery electric, we should not blink and we should use battery electric. The question is not whether we should use it, but the question is how far can we stretch that? And where we can no longer use battery electric, we should use things like hydrogen electric and hydrogen burn. And then there's going to be a tail end, which is significant. It's not a small part. It's maybe only 10% of the flights, but it might still be 40-50% of the energy consumed. Where it will take decades, if not a century, before kerosene type energy sources are replaced.
No, I completely understand what you're talking about there, and I mean it's a subject that's close to my heart as well. And I have an electric vehicle, and I've been saying for years, why do we care about range in electric vehicles? We should really just have extendable battery packs in there, so you don't even have to charge your car. You turn up, you swap the battery pack over, and it's just a matter of like dumping the dead battery out so it can charge slowly and efficiently, and then put in a fresh battery in. And if you're going to go on a long journey, you're going on holiday for the first time this year, then maybe you put 3 battery packs in. But for your local drive, I mean, I'm somebody who drives quite a lot and quite far, but most people have an electric vehicle. They drive like 100 kilometers a day. Why do we have a range of 400 or 500 kilometers?
Yeah. I think in the Netherlands, the average is 30 or 35 kilometers a day.
Yeah.
But you go back 20 years and people were obsessing over whether their diesel had 1,500 kilometers of range in their tank or 1,600.
Yeah.
And that's how far do you want to drive without getting a cup of coffee, right?
Yeah.
I certainly do not want to drive 1,500 kilometers without getting a cup of coffee.
No, you're absolutely right. When I was younger, I think that was a matter of pride. I can drive that far without stopping. But I think these days I see it differently. And I think that's the whole thing, isn't it? It's about, they say these days, transport time is lifetime. It's about making the actual journey and experience. And I think, like you say, hey, it'd be great to get all the way to Australia on one flight. But then at the same time, if you think about like sitting on a plane for, 12, 13, 16 hours, is that really so nice? Or would it be nice to maybe have a stopover somewhere?
Over, right? Why not get out and spend a day?
Exactly, yeah.
There's a nice analogy there, because what I see happening in cars at the moment, in automotive, is a little bit of a trend, you could say is retro, back from extending range of battery electric vehicles into battery electric vehicles that have what they call a range extender.
Mm-hmm.
That is a phenomenon that's starting to happen. You're seeing it in Japan, China. I have no doubt it will cross over to Europe as well. And the idea is a very small engine that you would use for those very few times when you have to go a bit further. And then look at an electric aircraft. If you calculate in the reserves and the alternates, etc. You're losing half of the benefit of battery electric. And so the smart guys, I think, in this sector are already factoring in that they resize that aircraft to the actual mission, but carry something on board for those hopefully never occasions, right? When you need to divert, but you need to have it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And certainly I know there's a company in Switzerland called Smart Flyer, and they've developed an airplane where you can actually swap the cone over. So you can have traditional Rotax motor in there, or you can actually run it on hybrid or full electric. And it depends whether you're just having a nice Sunday afternoon fly around where you live, or whether you actually want to get somewhere. So it's interesting idea.
And one of our projects actually is seriously looking at a non-negligible period when aircraft will be using two fuels, will be using SAF or liquid hydrogen.
Okay.
Because engine technology-wise, you don't really need to do rocket science. You do lose a few percentage points of efficiency, but you're gaining a huge amount of flexibility. Let's say into airports where you may not have hydrogen yet. You might be able to sell that aircraft into regions where it will take a decade longer than in Europe. I think Europe will make this move earlier than other major regions in the world. I think we owe it to ourselves to make that move earlier than North America or India or China. But that's difficult if you're an aircraft manufacturer, because you don't ideally want to build an aircraft which is only flying in Western Europe, right? I think you could imagine 10 years lead and then leading into other areas, but this is a global industry, and that global industry needs to make an honest living as well, and that's kind of the second element of Luchtvaart in Transitie. We are absolutely passionate about climate-friendly technology, but if you cannot make a living designing, building those, and airlines cannot make a profit serving their passengers, we're going to stay stuck in a situation where that is not going to enter the market in sufficiently quickly, and to make enough of a difference.
And Ron, this is another subject that's totally passionate to my heart, because the way you just had to phrase that, and it's the same as everyone else, including myself, this is not a criticism, it's an observation of the way the world works at the moment, is you've really got to be careful how you connect the word profitability with sustainability, because there is a lot of greenwashing out there, and this podcast is all about proving that not everybody's greenwashing, but my company is also about proving that you can earn money through sustainability. You mentioned earlier on the Dutch government, they saw this as an opportunity, and that's exactly what we write on our website as well. We say if it's not profitable, then it's just not sustainable. Fast forward 20 years from now, when we all realize we should have done more today, then it might be the other way around. It has to be sustainable to be profitable. But just right now, we need to make the CFO get on board and support it. We need the governments to say, yeah, we'll invest in this because it's going to make our country rich, and the people that live there are going to have a good standard of living in the future. I don't think we need to be embarrassed about that. So long as we are actually doing the right thing and making it profitable, instead of pretending to do the right thing and maximizing on profits and not really caring. And so that was another reason why I was desperate to speak to you today. And I know in your organization, you've got 3 different strands that the 12 projects run on, correct? There's technology, then there's ecosystem, and there's also knowledge. Could you tell me a little bit more about those 3 strands and the 12 projects underneath them?
People sometimes refer to, in innovation terms, philosophically, to what they call the triple helix model, how you entwine government action, so positive action to education, training, research, to industry. And you could say our 3-pillar approach is a, it replicates that. So in our funding, we're about 80-20. 80% is really hardcore technology development, and not research for research sake, but technology development linked to TRL gates that actually, ideally will lead to systems and products and propulsion systems and aircraft in the middle of the next decade. Because if we don't, the new aircraft aren't introduced continuously. So there is a generational shift somewhere in the 2030s, and we would like, that's the business side of the Netherlands. That's the level-headed focus. So we want that technology to earn itself onto the aircraft that enter the market in the 30s. So that's a large part of the budget. The ecosystem and the knowledge base. Ecosystem is about how do we make our companies, realize the potential of 1 + 1 is 3, and do they always realize what their neighbors are doing and how they can work together? You might be working on a hydrogen electric aircraft, but guess what? Hydrogen electric means that you need electricity, so you need wires. Are the wires guys already talking to the people that are actually getting current coming out of a hydrogen fuel cell? Often, yes. Not always. You would be surprised how sometimes you still have low-hanging fruit in getting that combined. And then there's another layer outside, which is how do we position what I would call the Dutch cluster vis-a-vis our leading companies like Airbus, like Embraer, like Boeing, where you get these shots once every 10, once every 15 years in terms of the portfolio of technologies that actually end up on board the aircraft. If you end up with a brilliant idea, but it's TRL 5 in 2030, there's one guarantee I can give you: it will not be on the next generation single aisle. And if it's not on that aircraft, you may have another shot in 2050. We don't want to wait for that. The knowledge part actually is looking a little bit more over the horizon, because the world does not end in 2035 or 2050. I hope it doesn't end in 2100 either, right? So there's stuff we realize we are not going to be capable of getting on board the next generation in the mid-30s. There won't be a new long-range aircraft in the 30s. Maybe a re-engining even. I won't venture into what Airbus's strategy is or Boeing's strategy is, but an all-new long-range aircraft, unless all of us are caught off guard by people like Jet Zero, that's mid-40s to maybe 2050, and the lower TRL. Actually, this is a pretty good moment to be working on that. So that's what sustainable knowledge is about. And it's about creating those links between our universities and some of the companies that can experiment, can play around with that technology.
And that's one of the things I love about the aviation sector. I mean, I started my career off in the car industry. So, when you talk about SAF, I remember back in the 90s, we already had cars in Brazil that were driving around on biological fuels. And then I came to BMW and they had 7 Series with hydrogen, and so all of this stuff, I remember it. But the difference is in the car industry, kind of the new tech comes in the big, expensive cars. And then it trickles down to the little car. So like 10 years later, like the student has a car with aircon or something,
Yeah.
And in the airline industry, it's quite the opposite. You start off with a tiny plane, low risk, test it with that. And then slowly you kind of trust it with more and more passengers. And then before you know it, you're in one of the larger fuselages with that technology as well. And it's interesting to see how that's completely the other way around to the car industry.
That's a good point, and I think what is behind that. That's why I've always been, really intrigued by the business aviation segment, and which has a couple of peculiarities you don't find in large civil commercial aviation. High-end cockpits, very high-performance aircraft. They often fly into airfields where the airfield itself is not equipped to the level of a main port like Schiphol or like Heathrow.
Yeah.
And that your payload, the guy that you are transporting, he does not want to be told that he's got to wait 2 days before he can fly back, right? If there's bad weather, and companies like Bombardier and Gulfstream and Dassault also have a very intriguing track record in terms of the number of upgrades, the number of new aircraft that are coming. If you look at that, you'll find that the new models produced that frequency is 5 to 10 times higher than, say, big models at Airbus or Boeing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that happens there that can be taken up, and then if you're talking about batteries or hydrogen, it's maybe even more the case that some of the proving ground is going to be at the lower end, as you call it.
Yeah, and I remember one of the companies you've got, I think, is looking into hydrogen propulsion, and they're going to retrofit it in a Dash 8. And it seems to be a lot of companies are using Dash 8 as a flying test bed, or at least something to prove the technology in, right?
Correct. And I kind of picture it like this: if we're looking at an aviation system 2050 plus, which we believe, there will be aviation in the second half of the century. There will probably be decidedly more aviation than there is now, twice as much, I would guess, unless we are, unless something really dramatic happens in terms of the global economy or the global geopolitics. And so that will need to be fundamentally different. That's a huge canvas to be painting on. And if you can start that canvas in one little corner, which is putting something in retrofit into an aircraft, especially because the infrastructure side with airports, certification, airlines, the fuel producers, getting everybody to a tipping point where the lights in succession go from red to green. You need to have a proving ground, and that's why, because let's face it, retrofitting Dash 8 de Havilland aircraft is not going to reduce aviation CO2 footprint at a global level by dozens of percentage points. But it's a magnificent way to prove that it works, and to get your toe in the water and to get that change going. And there are airlines that are willing to do that at the level of their regional fleet, and there are governments willing to sponsor that. Because another thing which is really intriguing about that is that take a country like Norway, take a country like New Zealand, but others as well, where there are what are often referred to as public service obligations. Where communities are connected by routes that are not per se economical. And if the state, the entrepreneurial state, if the state decides to act on that, it can also act by putting, let's say, laying down specifications for how you're going to fly those routes. And that could be, I want, like Norway has done for 2040. I want my flights to be zero carbon by 2040.
And you can only get in if you're carbon neutral.
Those signals can be incredibly powerful in terms of getting that first motion in place.
And I believe it's Norway as well that's also said they want their airs to be used to test new technologies as well. They've basically given up a lot of airspace and said test it there, which is wonderful to see. Yeah, I mean, there's so much coming on. I know there's a big debate as well about the new European skies to totally change the flight routes in Europe to make them more effective and more efficient as well, I believe. I don't know if you've heard about that, but when we sponsored a SAF conference with the IATA a couple of years back, and that was a big conversation there about, can we not just, fly in a straight line instead of going around countries just because there were political reasons when this was set up in the 50s,
It's one of those duh items, right? But don't be mistaken in terms of single European sky or the legislative package versus CESAR, which is the research program. I think this is one of the more, dare I say, frustrating topics where all the technology is there, where aircraft are often decades ahead of what the ground infrastructure is capable of. And what the human mind is capable of is sometimes decades behind what the technology on the ground can do, particularly if it concerns things like sovereignty over your airspace. Can you rely on a remote tower? Are you willing to rely on one like the FAA does? One en route travel or traffic management organization which covers many different nationalities. MUAC in Maastricht already does that for a number of functional airspace blocks in Europe.
Okay.
But it's the political end that has proven very difficult to change. Just one thing, though, if you'll get figures of 4 or 5% versus up to 10% in what you could save in emissions by straightening those lines.
Right.
Great, but it's 2 years of growth. After those 2 years, you're back to where you were.
Okay, I understand.
So we need to, we absolutely need to do that because the best fuel, climate-wise or environmental-wise, is the fuel you do not burn, right? So that's not waste fuel in circuitous routes. That's not waste fuel in holding patterns. All good stuff. But we need to burn the right fuel, and that is SAF or it's hydrogen or it's battery electric. And we need the aircraft to become more fuel efficient as they are, which is boring, some people would say, because that's about lighter materials, better structures, better aerodynamics. But we have not reached the end of the road there. We can still get another 20 to 30% out of aircraft in terms of their energy efficiency.
Absolutely. I feel like I'm just plugging other podcasts today, but one of the first podcasts we did was with a company called Trelleborg, and they're a wonderful Scandinavian company, and what they're doing is they're retrofitting, let's say, heavy metal parts with lighter material parts, sometimes plastic, sometimes composites of other materials, but just to take the weight out of the existing airplanes, because as you rightly said, this isn't the same as the car industry. In the next 5 to 10 years, we can change the fleet. With airplanes, they fly for a few decades before they get replaced, right?
Yeah. Of course, traditionally, our system of transporting people has meant you take weight out by putting a lighter seat in. That means you put more video on, right? You put more in-flight entertainment on. I think at some stage you'd like to have it all trickle down to actually having a more lightweight aircraft and burn less fuel. But it's happening. I mean, let's not beat ourselves up. It is happening, and we are burning per passenger kilometer 80% less fuel than the 1960s era 707s and DC-8s. Yeah, which is huge. Yeah. No industry I know of has done that, but the industry has grown 20-fold.
Yeah, and there's still, like you say, so many low-hanging fruits there. When we talk about the 1.5 degrees goal, I'm as nervous as you, Guy. I think we've already, breached that goal last year in 2024 in terms of average global warming temperatures. So this could make us nervous, but we find in every project we do with our clients, we set unbelievably high goals, and then they end up overachieving them. And if I just think about a workshop we did recently called an ecothon, we set the challenge for the people who took part to make suitcases more sustainable. We all have like 10 bags at home and they're just gathering dust for 11 months a year. Why do we own these suitcases? So of course, the whole challenge was to create sustainable business models out of making suitcases more sustainable. Yeah. And the first one was, of course, shared suitcases. But as the group carried on, within 48 hours, they came up with 26 business models, which I was like amazed. I've seen a lot of these sort of things, but it was an amazing group. And if one of the things, for instance, is why do we fly with all our laptop chargers? What's the point of actually flying? I've got a MacBook, so I have my Mac charger, and I fly over to the UK, and I've got my European adapter, and I've got my British adapter. Like, I just shouldn't be doing that. I should just fly over, maybe with a USB-C cable, but not even that. I should get to the airport and be able to rent an adapter for the next week. You know, same again with clothes. Why do we take so many clothes with us on holiday? You go somewhere hot, you're going to buy lots of clothes for a climate that you might not wear where you live. You know, you go to see a show in London. Why can't you rent a big fat Rolex watch if that's what, you know, turns you on, the biggest Breitling you've ever seen? You could rent that for a weekend, and sneakers that are far too expensive for you to buy instead of flying them around the world. There's so many low-hanging fruits if you just take a little step back and say, how can we make the future a better place than today through sustainability and also earn money with it? And that seems to be exactly what LIT is doing, working with governments, working with universities, working with industry, working with startups, bringing small and large companies together, focusing on its home country in the Netherlands, but also looking over the wall and not just saying, hey, Netherlands first. It's about how can we all work together in this global industry to make sure that people can fly for the second half of this century. And you know,
absolutely, and of course, underlying that is I mean, I have two kids. They're both in their late 20s, early 30s. You know, owning a car is no longer you know, that's not like top of the list.
no,
By the way, they live in cities where it's more of a burden than a benefit to have a car. But
yeah,
I do suspect our or the mentality that we have that we're kind of, you know, evolving into in Western Europe is not the same as in the global South. You know, we should be a bit careful in terms of, you know, kind of transposing where we are into other parts of the world. But I think it does give us a moral duty to rethink a lot of things. Where,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
do we really need to have that many shirts? Do we, etc. Now, that's obviously not something that our program is concerning itself directly with.
Yeah.
But it is something that you need to consider in terms of, you know, what is the value chain from, you know, the idea through knowledge to production into aircraft, and who are we serving? You know, who are the passengers of the future?
Yeah.
We think that people will continue to want to travel the world, but we also think that it's, you know, it's not the idea that you need to make trade-offs in terms of what the impact is of what you're doing. I don't see that going away.
Yeah.
So I think airlines have have a role to play, and of course the manufacturers slightly behind that, but have a role to play in addressing how you do that.
Yeah.
For sure.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And finding a solution that fits for everyone is I think, an important thing. You mentioned that at the time that your fund was set up, there was also the Growth Fund in Germany. But if I ask a question now about why do you think that Holland is one of, you know, the first adopters of this? Why do you think the Dutch government is ahead of the curve? It's not that there's funds like this all over the world. It is something special. You are ahead of the curve, right?
Well, I'm not to brag about it, but I think we are realizing that we cannot go it alone. I think we can be part of the leading pack in terms of doing that. And first off, of course, you know, don't laugh, but the Netherlands is very, very exposed in terms of the potential impact of climate change. Now, that doesn't concern every citizen every day of the week, but it concerns enough people that we worry about that. Aviation is one of the sectors that often gets referred to as being, being hard to abate, but also being one of the bad guys. And so we have a factor like Extinction Rebellion, like others, like Greenpeace, that are, I think, genuinely concerned about that. But it's also an incredibly important sector for our economy and for our way of life. The Dutch model, if you call it that, has been open, trade-based, tolerant. Has had an influx and an outflux of people going back as far as the 16th century, and even wars have been fought over that between the Portuguese, the Spanish, the British, and the Dutch. Fast forward to where we are, maritime is of course still important, but aviation is a backbone of that open society and connecting people and bringing goods to the country and moving them from our country to other places. So we need to crack that. And at the same time, in the Netherlands, the share of our footprint, the aviation share, is more than twice the EU average. So we are absolutely top of the league, along with other countries in the developed, Western Europe environment, like for instance the UK, where it's a very big factor. So
Yeah.
we want to turn that into a burning platform to create a different industry. And
Okay.
that's the case for the government, really, to be a positive actor in this, to be an entrepreneurial state in terms of knocking heads together and bringing the sector together in terms of how we affect change.
And there's been so many pioneers in the past. I think they always say a specialist is somebody who'll explain why something can't be done, and then somebody else comes along and does it anyway who didn't understand, right? And I think it's wonderful to see the Dutch government doing this and taking the lead together with a few other governments and trying to prove this principle. And I'm sure that's going to pay dividends financially, but it's also hopefully going to inspire lots of other places around the world to do the same.
And this is research and innovation. Not every project is going to deliver the results precisely as as intended when you start. But what you do know is if you do not start, you will not get any results.
Exactly.
When we were talking about this we spent some time on hydrogen. Hydrogen is almost a religion. There are people out there that are absolutely convinced that it is impossible to fly on hydrogen. Well, it's been done, so that is already proven false.
That's right.
But did you know that when at the start of aviation as we know it, and the French would say that was not the Wright brothers. They would say that de Saint-Exupéry was the one that actually flew heavier than air vehicle because it took off with its own power rather than a catapult pulling it. A larger percentage of people at that time were still, even scientists, were convinced that it was physically impossible to fly an aircraft that was heavier than air. It was a simple case of the laws of physics. We know better now, right? But we should take care not to make the same assumptions with respect to batteries or hydrogen, and have an open mind about it.
You're absolutely right. Although I do have to really, full disclosure, I studied physics. I worked for a long time and had a little role to play on the XWB turbine, and I was watching the A350 fly overhead in Paris last week, and I said to myself, I still don't believe that works. I just don't believe it works. I still don't believe that aviation is possible, and I studied the stuff, but it seems to somehow the magic happens,
I don't know if you know Rick Parker, but Rick Parker is one of the guys on our advisory board. He was the director of R&T at Rolls-Royce until about 5 or 7 or 8 years ago, and he was he was the chairman of our board when I worked at Clean Aviation, or Clean Sky, which led to Clean Aviation. And he had this wonderful way of saying, we build engines where the internal heat, the internal temperature in the turbine and in the combustion chamber is a couple of 100 degrees warmer than the melting point of the material that the engine is built from. And we don't just do it; we do it 1,000 times a day, every day. Unbelievable, right? When you think about it.
It's true. It's true. I remember hearing that when I was at Rolls-Royce back in the day as well. It's amazing. It's an amazing industry. It really is. Now, listen, I'm conscious about your time because, I know you're doing a really important job and, you took so much time for us last week in Paris and you're taking time today as well. But is there anything in this podcast that you wish we'd spoken about? We talked about how the fund was set up. We talked a little bit about the 12 projects. I love, by the way, the project with the wires in the wing for the hydrogen electric propulsion. That's a wonderful thing, and to see hydrogen propulsion altogether and fuel cells being researched into. But is there any kind of project that we didn't talk about that you'd like to mention, or something else about the organisation that you'd like to get the message across in this opportunity?
Well, I think we've touched on many areas, not all, but many areas in terms of what the portfolio is that we're currently researching. That's not complete. There are a lot of areas in the aircraft that we don't have in our program. There isn't a strong competence in the Netherlands on, say, avionics and flight decks. Luckily, I think if we zoom out and we can consider ourselves Europeans, there clearly is very strong capability in France, and Airbus has been one of the leaders with the two-person flight deck and fly-by-wire, etc. So we can take comfort in that sense if we consider ourselves look a little bit around us in terms of how we define ourselves. If we define ourselves as a European sector, then there are areas of strength that we can build on without everybody having to do everything, right? And I think that's part of the Dutch mentality, to pick out the areas where we where we have defendable or maybe even exploitable niches.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about hydrogen. We also have some pretty exciting projects which are started a few years later, but are now getting up to speed quite quickly on battery electric. We should not forget the fact that if you can take weight out of the aircraft, and by the way, you can do that with materials that are more recyclable, like thermoplastics, and you can produce them, as Airbus would say, at rate 100, because the manufacturing industry is not going to be the same manufacturing as we had in the 70s or 80s.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest challenges for the next generation of new commercial aircraft like single aisle is not what it looks like or whether it's a mid-wing or a low wing, but it's what's the manufacturing system, because everything is creaking at the seams at the moment to produce the aircraft that the market wants. And come 2035, it's probably going to be twice the current production rate, and that has to be totally different. So that manufacturing technology is really key. And then, like you said, wiring. Some of the onboard systems have a tremendous capability. We have a wonderful company in the east of the Netherlands that has spawned from the nuclear industry in terms of centrifuges, where they would define themselves as, what we do is we make machines that rotate at 100,000 plus RPMs. And the things you can do with that in terms of the power density of starter generators, the power density of the environmental control systems on board aircraft are really exciting. And you're looking at a box about the size of your laptop. You think, well, what's so sexy about that? But if it weighs half and it's twice as powerful as its predecessor, all these things, every little counts, right? Everything you can do really helps.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I saw that, by the way, and I'm glad that you explained a little bit more about that. I think they've got like a Romanian link. It's a Dutch-Romanian company. And it looks really interesting as well. And all these little things add together. And once you get it all together, then all of a sudden the solution starts looking easy, And I mean, all I can say, Ron van Manen, I heard a phrase. I've done some projects in Holland over the years and also worked for Dutch companies in other countries. And there's a really beautiful phrase that I heard, and it said, God made the world and the Dutch made Holland. I think that's a phrase that people say. I'm interested to see what the Dutch are going to manage to make over the next 10 years in terms of aviation. But if you've managed to make such a wonderful country like the Netherlands, then there's no borders to what could happen with flight in the future.
And it doesn't stop in 10 years' time either. We should realize that, right? So tomorrow starts today. And one of the things that we hope LIT can prove is that there is a case for how we cooperate and how government and industry work together, and how the industry and knowledge centers like NLR, the Dutch Aviation Lab, and universities like TU Delft, but others as well. What we're seeing is an influx of technology. 20 years ago, if you wanted to be in aeronautics, you would go to aeronautical engineering, which I did, by the way. But what we're increasingly seeing is that some of the challenges are in digital, they're in electric, they're in cryogenics, they're in areas where the medical industry has a tremendous amount of knowledge in terms of cryogenics and how you cool magnets and how you cool the electrical wiring. That's some of the things that keeps us busy and keeps us really fired up is finding that knowledge base and pulling it into this industry.
No, and again, that's what we're completely passionate about at Progress Factors as well, and it's just great. And I really would like to keep in touch with you and your company and or your organisation, and just to see how these 12 projects progress, but also how the organisation grows and how the interaction will be throughout the whole world. But it's been absolutely wonderful speaking with you today, Ron. I'm really going to keep an eye on what's happening here, and I'm sure we're going to keep in touch personally as well. And maybe in a year's time or something, we can do another catch-up podcast and revisit it and see how things are progressing. But I'm going to wish you, from all our listeners, the very, very best of luck, because it's in all our interest that you guys are successful. And that's the wonderful thing of the job that you're working in, is it will touch so many people's lives. Thank you once again for the time you found today.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, and all the best. And let's check up in a year or two.
All right then. Okay, Ron. Good luck to you and the team. Thank you.
Thank you.